Today is all about blending from one color to the next, and avocados are going to be the perfect subject matter to get that done. So let's get started. You can see from my sketch it's a very loose outline. I just indicated where I wanted some of those harder edges to be. And I'm going to start with a darker green, probably the darkest green I'm going to use, but I'm going to go in with pretty heavy water just to create that damp surface so that when I add this, the more medium tone, they're going to blend together. And I'm going to keep moving, continuing on to the meat of the avocado. But I don't want to cover everything. So now what I've done is I've just added a lot of water to my brush, and you can see I'm using a fairly large brush, and I'm blending those colors together. And I'm going to do the same for the recess in the pit here. I do see that I'm getting a lot of too much blending because I was pretty wet. So no problem, I'll just go ahead and lift it off. And that gives me the opportunity to define the very edge of that recess as well. So I'm going to go in a little bit darker here, still getting a lot of spread so I can come back in and lift that up. So not to panic. But you could wait if you prefer not to have to lift it off. And then while I'm going into this center area, I'm being careful not to overwork this area. I'm not getting quite the depth I want, so that's okay. I'll just continue along in another area of the avocado. So I wanted the meat of it to have a little more vibrancy in the color, so I just went in with a more saturated version of the green gold. And now what I need to do is capture the edges. So on my sketch, I didn't really draw every kind of bump that's on that rough skin. So as I'm dragging the color, you can see I'm going kind of quickly and messy because I want to imitate that rough, the leathery part of the skin of the avocado, which is on the very edge. And then what I can do is I can drag more of that color in by just introducing a more watery mix. And that'll give us that nice edge of the avocado. And if it's not spreading enough, just add a little bit more water. I have pretty nice combination here, so I'm getting about the right thickness. So here I want that recess to be a little bit of a darker value, and as it spreads, I'm just lifting it off. I picked the larger brush here, is better for lifting. And what you do is you just get water on your brush and then clean it off and then go in with a somewhat dry brush, and that will remove the pigment you don't want. And again, I'm using it as an opportunity to get a little bit of a harder edge on the lower portion of that recess. Most of the paints I chose today have a little bit of granulation, so it's nice to echo kind of what happens in nature. Things aren't perfectly smooth, or most things aren't. And so that pit area, a little bit of speckle is desirable. And here I just wanted a little bit of a bumpier edge, so I'm just going in with a small brush with a lot of pigment on my brush, and I'm just capturing a few more bumps. And while the subject of this video is about blending, you can see as I transition from one color to the next with a very wet environment, they're going to blend together. And fruit is a perfect subject for that. A lot of round and a lot of contouring. So as you can see, I'm kind of painting around the shape of the avocado. I'm not going from top to bottom per se. And that allows me to pick up some of the same I call them grooves that I see in the reference photo. So starting on the version, the slice that has the pit, I'm going to do the same technique where I'm going to go on the edges with the darker, and then I will add more of a liquidy mixture to the brush to pull it out a little more. And then I'll go in with the medium to blend those together. So don't worry about your edges. As you can see, when I put this in, it just kind of softens all those hard edges and you get that nice transition from the dark to the light. And remember, don't fill up the entire area, leave some and go in with just water, or in this case, I went in with a really watery yellowy mix to get a little bit more color on this one slice. And I'm doing the same as I did for the recess of the pit, except I'm going in a little more aggressively or assertively with more pigment. And I had the same issue where I went in kind of quickly, not very patient. And so I got a little bit of a spread out of that sienna, so I can just remove that like you see here. If your brush has too much water, it's going to invite that pigment outside of the lines. So try to make sure that your brush is fairly dry when you do the lift. I do like the grooves, was I calling them? These little lines that are kind of around the edges. So I'm going in with a type of a glaze, just the same color as I had, it's just a little more pigmented. And then I can use the tip of that round brush to get more linear. And with the granulating paint, you can see I kind of dab it in places, and I'm going very heavy with the dark here at the bottom. And it's hard to see in the reference photo, but what I'm doing now is I'm lifting off at the very edge of the pit because there is a slight change in value there. And so I wanted it to be a little lighter. And then I can do our favorite trick of adding darker behind the pit to make it really pop off. And here I just want to pick up a little bit more interest in the fleshy part where I can see darker greens transitioning to the lights. So now here's our trick, very dark around the outside of the pit, and look at that, bam, it immediately pops off. I didn't really leave that little bit of green avocado on the edge of the pit, so I'll kind of work on that to show a little more variation. Again, here I want that leathery skin to be very bumpy and very dark to show a delineation between it and the medium tones that are underneath. And in addition to being somewhat realistic, it also gives us a nice variety of tones and values where we have those deep dark colors mixed in with the lighter, softer blends. The other thing to mention is you might be able to see I'm holding my brush very far away from the tip. And what that's allowing me to do is to stay very loose. Sometimes it gets a little bit out of control, but that's okay. You just blend in where you don't like the mark you made. But if you're too close to the end, it's more like drawing, and you tend to be a little bit tighter, where here we want these more painterly brush strokes, and being far away from that tip allows me to get those. There was a little bit of brown up where the stem had been connected, so I'm just adding that in, and I'm allowing that brown to blend into the green around it for, again, more of that transition. I'm wanting a little more contour on the pit itself. It's popping out nicely at the bottom, but not necessarily on the top. So I'm just mixing, blending the browns and the siennas to give it a variety, because you can see in the reference photo that it's a bit speckled. So here I can follow along the contour, going in that circular motion, and that will give the pit itself some form. It also allows you to remain somewhat, get some brushier marks in there, and feel more like a painting. You know, we're not trying to paint a photograph, or at least I'm not. The recess here felt a little hollow, so I'm just going in now that I've got the pit on the one on the right, and I'm just adding a little more of that sienna to deepen that hollow of the recess. And of course I'm adding some white gouache because I feel like by adding those light lights that I might have left off, that's going to make the darker darks more relative, I should say. So the highlights here allow us to make the darker tones feel darker and the medium tones kind of somewhere in the middle. As always with gouache, it kind of disappears into the background, especially if it's still a little bit damp or if you've got a lot of water in the gouache mix, which I do in this case. So I'll just go on a couple times over it. And now here to put the shadows in, you might go, whoa, that's a lot of water, but that's intentional. And that's because the color I'm using is very granulated. And so in order to invite the separation of those pigments, I need a lot of water for those pigments to move. So I can still go in a little deeper as it touches the avocado and let it kind of dissipate out toward the edges. And then just compositionally, it felt a little bare at the top. So I've really diluted that same shadow color, and I'm just gonna make some, you know, just kind of haphazardy marks here just so that it feels somewhat composed. And then I'm just glancing over my finals and thinking I could use a little more of those deep darks and make a little sharper line in a few places before I wrap, and then maybe even a couple more highlights at the end. But overall, I think this came out really nicely. It was really a 30-minute painting in my sketchbook, and I found it quite enjoyable. I hope you did as well. As always, I appreciate you watching and would love to hear in the comments if you painted an avocado as well, and what you found useful and what else you'd like to see. So until next time, happy painting.